Hello, everybody. I am Sam Harvey from the Center for Career and Professional Development, and today we're going to talk about pricing your design work. So, just to give an overview, this talk is going to focus a little bit more on the freelance specifically for design work, but a lot of this can be used even for sort of one-off projects within that. If you are a fine artist or even an illustrator that's looking more about how do I sell just individual prints of work that already exists in some way, you would want to check out our Pricing Your Artwork talk, which is also on this YouTube channel. So really today we're going to focus on what it means to make a living off your freelance work and sort of how pricing works in order to do that. Nothing I say is going to be set in stone, and it's always important to continue to keep up with what is currently going on in the industry to remain sort of generally relevant and to see kind of what the current trends are happening. So, I'm going to start by just kind of doing a really slight overview of what some of the common pricing models that you'll find out in the world will be, and then I'm going to go over them a little bit more specifically. So there's hourly rates. So this is sort of a really general way of looking at the work, similar to how you might look at a desk job, an after school job, babysitting job, anything like that. So if you work 10 hours and your rate is $50 an hour, you'll make $500 for a specific project. There's project-based pricing. So rather than saying, well, I will work for $50 an hour, you say this logo, this project will cost this much to be able to complete. And then there's something that's very similar to project-based, but is sort of a different way of approaching your prices for that, called value-based. And this is going to be more pricing based off the value that your work will give to the client. So it's not necessarily saying like, oh, a logo will cost about this much, but sort of looking at, okay, you want me to design a logo. What sort of benefit does that new logo offer to your business, and pricing based off of that. I'm going to go deeper into the pros and cons as each, but for all of them, it's really important to base your numbers on what is reasonable for the clients you're working with. And what is reasonable is going to differ a lot for different people. Some may think $200 for a logo is a lot, and some people are going to say, wow, that's really cheap. It's fully okay to turn down work if somebody can't meet your base prices to be able to survive, which can be really difficult, especially if you're having struggles with money, and a little bit will help you get by. And if you're unable to do work, though, I always recommending somebody else who will be able to do it for the price that they're asking. I'm going to talk a lot about prices today, but you want to really make sure you're staying consistent and really working with that to grow your client base, because as you gain more experience and are able to expand your network a little bit more, you'll find people that are willing to pay the prices that you are setting and that are interested in paying those prices for a work that they agree is equal to those prices. So I'm just going to jump right on in, and we're going to start by talking a little bit more about hourly rates. So hourly rates are really great for when you're first starting out, so that you can really begin to figure out what things are going to cost. As a student, your hourly rate will probably be a little bit lower than a professional, just because you're still technically in a learning phase for it. But it's still a great chance to understand yourself as a designer, because you're going to be pricing things by the hour. You'll start to really understand how long creating certain things will take you, and you'll start to also understand how people react to the amount of time that you will say that something took. Pay attention. How long is it taking you to do things? When you're pricing out how many hours something's taking you, include the research, include the sketches, include the updates that you're putting into it. Just because you're sitting down doing the active thing that the client expects you to be doing doesn't mean that your passive participation in their project is not considered billable hours. Anything you do that's considered part of working for this person is part of those billable hours. Really consider that every time you put into that design counts towards those hours. So when you're first originally creating scopes for the people that you're going to work with, and that's really giving them an idea of what this is going to cost them overall, you won't just say, yeah, it's $50 an hour, and they might go, cool, yeah, they're expecting you to take 2 hours, you take 20. That's going to cause you issues as far as hourly rates are going to go, so you always want to have them understand a general expectation of how long something might take you to do. It's important to be clear how you're also going to track your hours and to know if they have a cap on how many hours you can work on something. So they might say, well, if we're doing $50 an hour, I can pay you for 10 hours of work. That's important for you to know, because then you should only put 10 hours of work into the project that you're doing, because they're telling you right then and there they can't and probably will not pay you for more than 10 hours. Some freelance providers, so if you're going through sort of a website that helps to outsource and connect freelancers to potential clients, will provide time tracking systems, but it might also be important and good for you to consider finding another task tracker. That way you'll be able to verify with the person, like, yep, nope, see, here's the thing, here's the hard data that says I was spending this much time working on this thing, which is not a comfortable, fun thing to do always all the time, but can be really great for clients that you are finding are not responsive to the hours that you're saying that you're working. You'll generally need and really should provide a scope beforehand, which will be an estimate of the hours it might take to complete the project. And as things take more time or the project grows, update the client on any new estimates so that they have an idea of what you'll be charging them before you send them an invoice. So this is really going to be important to update that, like, as things take more time, like, oh, I thought that I was going to be able to get this logo done in this amount of time, but because we decided to go with this route, it's taking me a little longer than expected. There's a lot more detail than I thought. It's going to take me 3 extra hours. Do we want to do that, or do we want to go with a different option that's going to be less detailed? Or as the project grows, okay, cool, originally we decided we were just going to do a logo, but now you want a logo and you want me to kind of help facilitate the ordering of swag with the logo on it. Great, we can do that. That's going to be this many more hours that I'll be billing you for. So it's never just, oh, okay, you're asking me to do something more. Okay, yeah, we'll squeeze it in. Always let them know and continue to communicate throughout the project. After you've worked on a project and two, consider how the hourly price you're doing is currently feeling. Is what you're making worth the free time you lose when you're working? That's always a really important thing to consider. If you worked over the weekend and that meant not getting to go see the movie you were interested in seeing, then how does that sit with you? Is that, yeah, cool, I'm happy I made some great money, we'll keep doing this. If not, kind of going through this idea of, well, what would be worth the time? So Daniel Mall, who has written a lot about design pricing, that's Daniel, Daniel, Mall, like Mall, suggests using sort of object-based pricing over dollar amounts often when you're starting to figure this out. So what are 10 hours of your time worth? Is it a new TV? Is it a new camera? Is it a dinner? Scope out your hours based off of that. What do you need to make within 10 hours of your time to get it worth it, to make that 10 hours worthwhile for you to be working on this client's project instead of off doing something that you could be doing on your own. And this will change depending on where you are in your life. So some of the general pros and cons of hourly pricing. I'll start with the pros, I guess, because we'll just read normally. So pros really can help you understand how efficiently you work. Something that you're like, yeah, this should take 5 hours might suddenly take you 3. You might think it'll take 3 and it ends up taking you 5. It's going to really be good for you to just see what that ends up looking like, and it will give you a baseline to work with from there. It's going to, over time, charging hourly will add up for your difficult clients. If you have a lot of emails back and forth, if they want a lot of tweaks and adjustments, billing hourly ends up being like, cool, every time I'm interacting with you, that's going on the clock as far as what I'm going to be charging with you. So you are at least making money off of those difficult interactions. It is really common for the industry at large to charge hourly, especially if you're going to be freelancing for a company. They might want to be charging you on it hourly, and it will scale with the projects that you're working on. So you're able to adjust your hourly rate over time, and a bigger project is going to end up paying off a lot more in the end. Some of the cons are it doesn't necessarily always scale with experience. At some point, you can continue to charge more as you get more experience. But an important thing is that as you get more experience, you also get work done a lot quicker. So it doesn't always actually end up meaning that you're making more if you really break down because you're working less hours. Oftentimes, the time you spend on a project may be questioned by the employer, and it values the time you put into the work over the product that you are necessarily producing. So it's saying that your time is the valuable thing here, not whatever it is that you are creating. Okay, so project-based pricing. So this is going to be looking at your prices as a tie-in to the end result instead of necessarily looking at how you got here. So if you're at a point where you're pricing like $100 an hour, usually project-based 100 to 100 maybe per hour. Usually project-based pricing would be sort of that next step in your pricing journey, because if you're able to charge that much for an hourly rate, then you are likely pretty experienced at this point and working with clients that aren't necessarily going to shy away of what can often feel like really high lump sums for these types of projects. So project-based pricing, you're going to, over time after you've worked hourly, really know how long a project is going to take you and be able to price it out really when someone tells you, like, oh yeah, I'm looking for a logo, after you've talked to the client a little bit to sort of understand where they are in the process. And therefore, you might be able to be like, yeah, that can be done in 3 hours. But just because the project is only going to take you, or does only take you 3 hours, it doesn't necessarily mean it's only worth $300 if you really think about sort of the long run of that project. So for determining prices for project-based, rather than just going based off, you're like, oh, well, I guess this will take me 3 hours. So rather than saying it's $100 an hour, for 3 hours, I'll just say it's $300. Maybe you'll get it done a little bit quicker, then you make a little bit of extra money. Maybe you get it done a little bit longer, you might lose some money. So how else will you determine the price? Think beyond just the amount of time you're going to spend creating this project. It's definitely a huge portion of it, but the point is that you're trying to do more than just get your hourly rate if you're on a project-based pricing scheme. Do you actually want to work on this project? If you do, collaborate and see what's going to work with the budget of the person that you are going to be working for. If not, then you don't need to work with them to negotiate the prices within that. You maybe lean a little towards higher for those types of clients. What is the client actually willing to pay? And this is where you're going to really want to do some research about who the potential client is. A startup might have less money to spend than a big client. Your parents, friend from work, probably not expecting to spend that much money. Depending on who that friend from work is, though. They might be a higher up person that is like, yeah, no, I'm really serious about this business. I do want to put the money in to invest. Talk to the person, but also do some research about people that are in sort of similar level, similar size businesses, and just kind of see what sort of levels of income and stuff that they have. I, for example, have been asked to do logos, and when I quote $200, I've been scoffed at as like, oh no, we were not going to spend that much. And that's an important thing to understand. While you're in the middle of this negotiation project, some ways to even do that research straight on would be asking the client if they have a budget set aside, or do you have at least $100 set aside for that, or do you have at least this much set aside for that? That will allow them to sort of say, at least give you a ballpark maybe of what they were looking at, or they might go, we haven't actually thought about that at all. If they ask you how much you're going to charge, I would offer a wide spectrum that's going to depend on the scope and see where they go from there. So you might say, well, this could cost anywhere from $100 to $500 and see how they react to that sort of area. They might go, okay, cool, well, we want to keep it closer to the $100 range in that case. That starts to give you an idea of what it is that they're looking to pay, and that can, one, help you understand what this project is going to look like overall and sort of what it is possible that you might be making from it. Often for project-based pricing, it's best done to offer it in a tiered system where you can manage the client expectations based on what they're willing to pay. So for that, you would have maybe 3 tiers that you would offer the client after you've kind of gone back and forth. You'd go back and be like, cool, here's 3 potential options for you. A lower tier will get them more or less the base of what they asked for, and anything beyond is renegotiation or starts into an hourly rate. So they asked for a logo. They don't fully necessarily understand what goes into a logo or how much time it might take. Okay, cool, here you get a general logo. I'll do 5 versions up front. We'll narrow it from there. I'll work from there, and you get 3 adjustments on that. And anything after that, we're going to get into hourly rates. So that's if they decide to go outside of just doing a logo, like, okay, well, now we want swag. Okay, cool, I'll do that. And I'm going to charge my hourly rate for that. A middle tier is going to get them something more than what they asked for, something a little bit more thought through. So you'll do the logo. You'll also give them a couple of applications of the logo. Maybe it's you do a little bit more of a cohesive branding strategy within that. And then the high tier is what they asked for and beyond. That will definitely include sort of that branding strategy, but the things that they didn't think of. This creates the effect, though, sorry, that all kind of blur together, but this includes those things they're not necessarily thinking of that you, as someone who, as I said, because project-based would be after you've been working for a little bit, that you know they're going to need because you understand how this industry works and what types of things go into creating a brand, creating an identity, or creating a product, especially if you're doing prototyping work for someone who is not necessarily from that level of background. They don't necessarily know what all of that means. Within those, in the prototyping world like that, you would also probably want to consider a base that they cover the materials cost, and then you just need to run materials by them beforehand. But by offering this sort of tiered system of your pricing, it creates an effect of people comparing their options, which, once more, this will touch a little bit in the value-based thing, but it's this idea that they're looking and going like, oh, do I want the low tier thing? No, I don't want the bad thing. I want the thing that's going to help my business. And while they might not be able to fully go for the higher tier, it can be a way of trying to upsell somebody that you thought was like, okay, well, they were only really willing to spend $200 for this project, but if I add all of this on, maybe you can get them up to $350, $400, and then that makes this project a little bit more worth your while, depending on whatever time it ends up taking. So the pros and cons of this. For the pros, you can generally charge more for those quick projects. A logo doesn't have to be just $300. You might be able to do it for $500. You might be able to do it for more. The options that you can provide will allow for that chance to upsell the product. So while someone was maybe spending not that much, it suddenly becomes worthwhile because they choose a more expensive option. And even as you add those new options, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to take you that much more time to do the thing. It might just be part of your process anyway, but as far as what you're presenting them with, to them feels like a lot more. And it will cut out the clients you don't want to work with. You don't need to negotiate prices with someone that you're not interested in really working with. So if you can't work within their price range, then you don't need to go forward with the project. And you'll often find that if you have those clients that when you were hourly would be like, yeah, but just make a quick change. Just do a quick hour here and there that would look for things. This will start to cut them out because it will just not be worthwhile for them to necessarily have to do this new pricing model with you. Once more, I always recommend, if you can, refer them to somebody else to be able to do that. And if you like those quick one-off projects, then keep taking them, keep charging them how you're already charging. This is about maximizing your profits, but if you have things that people you like to work with, then keep working with them in what way works best. Some of the cons of project-based is that bad time management can lower your hourly pay. So if you price out that you think something will take you about 5 hours to do and you base the price on that plus the other information that you're taking in to create your price, but it ends up taking you 10 hours, then you're still getting paid less as far as an hourly breakdown of what you made ended up being. You also constantly have to scope out the options for the companies, and that can often take a lot of time to figure out, okay, what does this person need? Okay, can I give them that's around that? What does this look like? What are the other options? So you're kind of consistently doing research on the company itself and also then having to sort of pre-scope out those negotiations of what you want to offer them, and that takes time that you aren't going to get paid for in the end. So then value-based pricing. So this is going to whereas project-based is really tying what you're doing is a logo. So what does a logo cost becomes the question of that. It's not how much does an hour of your time cost, it becomes how much does a logo cost. Value-based pricing, instead of asking that, asks what value does a logo create for a company. So it's going to be a little bit of a broader way of handling how that pricing is thought of. So value-based pricing is similar to project-based. Oh, sorry, I've already said that. So remember that your client will in some way profit from the work that you do. So it's important to factor the impact of your work on the company into that pricing when you're doing it. So if you only charge $1,000 to update somebody's website or to create someone's website, but then the client ends up making $100,000 more because of that website update, then the client made out really well in the end. And a good business person on their end probably would have also paid $10,000 for a $100,000 profit. And those are really big, wieldy numbers, but it starts to bring that point across of what value-based pricing ends up looking like. So when you're thinking value-based pricing, you really want to look mostly at medium or large size companies where you're able to sort of get statistics about similar projects. There's a little bit more of a longitudinal data about growth that has been seen over time. And you'll probably also be more likely to find case studies from other companies or other people who have done similar work that show success. And what it is that you're negotiating by providing proof that the services you offer will help the company. So it's not saying, okay, I can redo your website for this much. It's saying, I can redo your website. Redoing websites doing these types of things have consistently gained similar companies this much profit over time, and it's therefore cool. So you're giving me this much money for what is not a promise of a bigger profit, but you're able to show a case of this is a pretty standard amount of profit that can be made from a similar thing. You can't guarantee it, but it can still show a trend towards profit gain within there, and it's about selling that. Value-based pricing, the pros of that, it's a negotiation you're having with it rather than necessarily coming at them with a strict number. It's about saying, well, similar companies have been able to gain this much from this, so I would want this percentage of that. And then it's more of a back and forth about what that might look like. You're obviously getting paid before they get the profits on that, so it's really with working with a person for a little bit to show what value you will give. It puts a higher value on the impact of your work than anything else, and that's always really important when you're thinking in creative world, that it's not just about a product all the time. It's what does this product do and offer, and it's going to really change the way other people look at your work if you're looking at the impact. There's also a research base to it, so you're not necessarily going to be pulling numbers out of thin air. You're going to be doing that research to say, here are some bases for why I'm going to be getting paid as much as I'm going to be getting paid. Especially with project-based, sometimes there is that expectation that it's just hourly, just put into a lump sum. And from there, numbers can get a little arbitrary, but with here it's saying, cool, this is a similar amount of money that you make. For that, it's fair for me to make this amount of money. Some of the cons are that it will take time to scope that out as well. You do have to do research, but the time you're putting into research for these things will probably lead to better profits overall than in project-based. So the end result will end up with you probably making more overall. It really only works for bigger companies, so depending on the communities that you are working with, it might not work out for the clients that you are with. It might be something that over time, if you continue to work with a client, you can continue to grow how much you can charge them because they'll see the impact of your work. But generally, bigger companies who are able to sort of sit within this business aspect and aren't as frightened about spending more upfront will be the main people for these. You also need to sell the impact of your work. The onus is going to be on you to upsell why there's value in this work, versus within project-based pricing, there's a little bit more of a tier. Within hourly, there's a different onus happening there, versus here, you're really having to sell impact, which is not necessarily the way that a lot of design work is always looked at. It's always looked at more of a thing that exists and not a idea overall, even though it definitely is an idea. So what do you pick? So my general feeling is, and based off the research I've done, based off my own experience, is to start with hourly. This is going to get you a base idea of what works and how long different things take. Then after you've done that for a little bit, try fixed price, try project-based, and see how you feel about that. Did that feel better in the end? Did that feel worse at the end? Decide from there. Build up your clients and start to see what they prefer. Maybe the people you work with are consistently like, no, we just want to pay you hourly. Then charge hourly. If that's the clientele you're interested in working with, then charge what they're going to want to pay with you, to work with you to pay. If you're looking to change your clientele, then it might be worth starting to change around and see, okay, well, these clients are the ones that will do the project-based pricing, and these are the ones I want, so I'm going to move towards project-based pricing more regularly. And be flexible. As you find your profits decreasing or your workload getting hard to manage, decide what the right move is going to be for that. It might be moving into a different pricing system. It might be slightly adjusting how much you're charging overall. Unlike the art world, it's a little easier within design world for your prices to kind of change around over time and to be really built off of who it is you're working with. In art world, you can't suddenly drop your prices. There's some that ends up reflecting weird on your art selling history. In design world, there's a little bit more flexibility to make those adjustments within. People will still often will often kind of be like, okay, well, what have you usually charged for these things? But it's a much different situation. So then as you grow, you're really going to want to continue to increase your skill sets to make sure that you're keeping competitive and relevant to the people around you. One of the reasons that older designers often have issues with changing jobs, or if they've left the workforce for a little bit, getting back in, is because they don't have up-to-date skill sets. It's what makes students one of the most lucrative things for new companies to invest in, because you know what's happening right now. You have access to pretty current technologies. So always, as you're moving, keep increasing your skill sets by learning new things and continuing to stay up on what current trends are happening. Don't forget to also increase your rate as your skills increase and as you grow your reputation. You shouldn't be staying stagnant all the time, otherwise you're going to start to undersell yourself. It's always about sort of placing a value on the work that you do, and to do that, you have to increase value over time. And if you ever are charging more than a client is able to pay, or unable to, or if you're unable to take on a new job, consider referring them to a peer. Consider maybe it's student if you're an alumni, a current student you currently know, maybe it's one of your friends, maybe it's someone who has a regular job but takes some freelance on the side, so they end up charging less overall. Figure out if there's somebody else, because that gets to keep you in the good graces of this person. If you were recommended to them, it means that the person who recommended them isn't going to be like, oh, why were you an asshole to my friend? It's always just a polite thing to do if you can. And it might even just be, oh, I can't do it. Here's a service that I know people use for freelance things pretty regularly. Just kind of good to keep that reputation up and going. So we're going to take a little bit of a turn as far as some pricing and spend a minute talking about licensing and rights management. So this starts out with this idea that you inherently own the rights to anything that you create. So make sure that you read contracts carefully to see if the company is saying that they're going to own the work in the end. Something like a logo, they probably want to own that in the end. That's a much higher fee than if you're doing a one-off and you continue to own the rights to the work in the end. Rights are really important, and it's good to consider how that's going to affect you. A company owning the rights to an image should really cover your rent probably for a couple of months. So it's not just a slight increase on your price, it's a pretty big increase on your price, because if they own the rights, you are giving them use of this image going forward forever. I've often talked to people about this with even just small one-off projects. If they have the rights to something, then they can continue to profit off of it until basically those rights run out, or until the end of time, basically. So a mark you make one time as an intern that they technically own the rights to, they may be using for 20 years, and if they throw that on a t-shirt, that's 20 years worth of t-shirt sales. So you can start to see why it's really important that it actually charges a lot more for them to own those rights. Some important things within that is you would generally offer limited rights. So this covers specific time periods, numbers of applications, or really specific applications that they are allowed to use the image for. And you're going to want to negotiate this out before you settle on a fee. So you want to ask them early on if they have specific usage situations, and then price based off those usage situations. Once more, considering how they might profit off of this work. So if they don't necessarily know what usage needs are going to be, then you're going to want to give them some options with pricings up front. So I'm using the numbers I got basically are based off of if someone was doing an illustrated type piece for a company that reached out to them. So presentation only. So that's sort of a first level step. It means that they are only going to be able to use this image in-house. It's most likely for a client pitch, and then if the client likes it, they might come back to you for different rights later on. For that, you might charge something like that $7,000. Then there might be another option above that might be that they can use this image in magazine and newspaper ads for up to a year, $5,000. All print media for 1 year, $7,500. All print and online media for 1 year, so it starts to bring it up there, $10,000. All print, online, and broadcast media for 1 year, $1,400. Buyout. They can use it however they want forever, $2,500. So you can see, even based off that last 1 year usage, so all print, online, and broadcast media for 1 year, $1,400, you are basically getting $11,000 more for a full buyout. And that's really important to understand, versus the others kind of went up by around $3,000 to $4,000 per different usage scenario. I don't specifically price out for these types of things. I found this on an article that I have on my last page, the names of the articles. If you want to look more specifically at those numbers, the way they did it was based off of the general going rate for editorial illustrations, basically. It's important to understand your usage rights for yourself, but also if you're a designer. As a student, you have some pretty loose rules about what you're allowed to use, but it's important to remember when you're working for a company, you can't just pull images off the internet and use them. You can't just pull images out of the database and use them. Even if you find something on Google, it doesn't mean it's open for use. It needs to be under Creative Commons, but generally speaking, remember that the artist owns the rights to the work and you need to speak with the artist or their representation to be able to use it. Even if you find an illustration on the database somewhere at the company you're working for that maybe got posted a couple years ago for something, it doesn't mean you have the unlimited rights to be able to use that. It's going to really depend on what that initial contract was. And I'm going to talk about contracts in a little bit, but even though not necessarily anything bad it might not adversely affect you, it's always just as an artist important to remember how you're supporting your fellow artists in letting people within and outside of this community understand the rights to the images that they create are not unlimited, that it's the person's work to decide to do with it what they will. So other things to consider as you're starting to talk with your clients and figure out what the pricing would be. So deposits are money. It would be money paid to you before you begin the project. You always want to get a deposit because you never know when someone's going to fall off the face of the earth on you or, in worst case scenario, stiff you. It's generally recommended to get about 50% up front, but if they can't do that, 30 is fine. The only sort of time I would end up considering less than that is if you're working with a reputable company that you can be sure is going to pay you, if maybe you've worked with someone a couple of times, if you trust the people that you're working with, but inherently get the money up front just because you never know what's going to happen. It's important to also, within that, consider payment timelines. How soon after delivering will you get paid? If the project is going to be happening over the course of a couple of months, it's a really large rebranding project of some sort, what payments will you need to have made throughout that period? At what times are you expected to do deliverables? At what times are you expecting certain payments? You don't want to work on something for 6 months and end up at the end with them not paying you for all of it. So definitely consider all of those as you're setting up your initial negotiations. Contracts are going to be really helpful only in the fact that they give you something to bring to a court. If you do get stiffed. For small companies, for individual people, it usually ends up not being worth the fees to follow up on a contract that was made. But for a bigger project, it is definitely important to have with big companies because the payout for that at the end may actually be worthwhile. I'd always still recommend a contract for all jobs because that lays out your expectations of what you believe you're delivering and allows the client to see those expectations as well as the amount that you are putting out there. And you can refer to it later if issues arrive, if miscommunications arise. But really those clear expectations are super important for these projects, especially within the realm of project-based pricing, understanding that I plan to deliver this to you, and then if halfway through the project they're like, cool, can we add this onto it? Then that goes, cool, then we need to renegotiate. So retainers. So a retainer is if you have a client you plan on working with for a while or you have ongoing work with. You might consider having them sort of put you on a retainer fee. So this means they pay you regularly for an expected amount of work. Often I would see this for social media, and that might be if someone's looking for you to give them a day or two out of your week pretty regularly to make posts for them, to make graphics for them. So you would charge them on a monthly basis to have that time. Usually you'd calculate that using mostly your hourly fee. Okay, so if you're asking me for a regular social media post every week, that ends up taking me 3 hours to fully get together every week. For the full month, it's going to cost you this much. This is going to allow you to know that you have regular money coming in, so it might be lower than what you might be charging on a regular project, but it's a baseline of money that you'll be making, and that can be really helpful as you're planning out bills, planning out for the future, things like that, to just know what you have consistently coming in. So some things that you will need. You're going to want to prepare ahead of time sort of what your rates and options are going to be. And depending on what pricing structure you're doing, you might not have these fully solidified, but you can at least get an idea of what regular charges might be before you're approached. But get an idea of the prices, because you can at least start to figure it out early on, and the longer you do it, the more quickly you'll be at figuring out how much things will cost. Have a general contract ready that you can plug information into. Once more, it's hard to enforce a contract, but it's good to have that agreement that you're both signing off on that you can reference later. I would especially consider the scope of the project within that sector, because that's really being able to show up, cool, we are doing a logo, and the logo includes these things. And then when they're like, cool, great, can I get one more revision? You can refer to that contract and be like, one more revision is going to cost you this much. So it helps you kind of keep them on track and to remember and continue to question things. And then you're also going to want to have an invoice ready to go. And for that, basically, you'll fill in the information as you go. Keep track of your invoices and also whether or not you've received a payment. Over time, I would definitely recommend getting an accountant to help you with managing the finances of this, but also, as this very boldly says, remember that you have to pay taxes as a freelancer. I don't know full scopes into that, but it's generally best to do that over the course of the year and not just waiting till the end of the year and then trying to figure it out. But an accountant can help you with that throughout the year on a pretty regular basis. But always remember, you do have to pay on freelance work that is a taxable income. There are thresholds and stuff. I don't know full about information about that. And in general, always remember, your work has value. You deserve to get paid fair money for the work that you're doing. You deserve more than exposure for the work that you are doing. You are going to college the same that a business major goes to college, the same, I guess, finance in undergrad, the same that, I'm trying to think of other majors, the same that an engineer is going to college. No one's just offering them exposure. You have specialized skills that deserve to be paid. Underselling your work undermines the other professionals in the industry. If people are going around only charging $50 for a logo, then people will start to believe that's the worth of a logo. So it doesn't necessarily, while it might help you to get a little bit of money and a little bit of work, it doesn't necessarily help your peers when they're also looking for work. And it's okay to turn down work, whether it's that they can't pay you the price that you're looking for, you're not interested in the project, whatever your reasoning is, it's okay to say no to doing work that you don't necessarily want to do, don't have time to do, whatever. Once more, if you have a peer you can refer them to, do that, but don't feel like you're helping out somebody. You are offering a service, it is for a payment. That's how it ends up working out in the end. So I'm once more Sam Harvey from the CCPD. At the bottom here, I've sort of linked, or not directly linked out, but provided the websites and the article titles for where a lot of this information has come from. So if you want to look a little bit more closely, feel free to check any of those out, and have a great day.